In this video, I'll be performing recommended preventative maintenance on your PDM 4.0 dispenser. First thing you want to do is remove your reel of cable ties, your hose and your hand tool. Make sure your power is turned off in the back and your power cord and your air hose are disconnected. And you also want to make sure you're properly grounded before doing that. And you also want to remove the scrap bin. And next, I'll show removing the covers off the PDM 4.0 dispenser. Now, I'll be removing the side cover to perform the 500,000 cycle recommended preventative maintenance on the PDM 4.0 dispenser. Next, I'll get an air hose and blow out all the visible nylon dust in this whole area. And then I'll be cleaning 3 sensors. There are 2 located on the top and 1 right in the front here. So, first thing I'm going to do is take and remove the screw that has a 2.5 millimeter Allen screw that holds this sensor in place. So I'm just going to take and remove that. And then what I'm going to do, these are relatively small sensors, so I have a small cotton swab. Use isopropyl alcohol. You just want to clean the inside of the sensor lens, and then you can take and put it back in position. I'll put the screw back in. Just make sure that you get your sensor seated properly. As you just be careful as you're setting it down like so. And you get it into position, and then you'll take and tighten your 2.5 millimeter Allen screw. And then you also want to do the other sensor the same way. And the last sensor I'll clean is the exit sensor. Again, use a cotton swab with isopropyl alcohol and just take and push it inside the hole where the cable tie comes out. It's approximately a couple inches back inside there, and it's on the top and bottom is the sensor lens. Next, I'll be performing the preventative maintenance on the piston of the PDM 4.0. We do have 2 different units. This one here has a 1/4 inch airline, and the preventative maintenance is recommended every 1 million cycles. And we have another unit that has a 3/8 inch airline here, and that needs to be done every 500,000 cycles. Next, I'll be removing these 4 screws from the faceplate on the dispenser with a 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench. Slide straight out. Next, I'll be removing 8 screws from the main cover. 1 here, 3 on this side, 2 on this side, and 2 on this side with a 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench. After removing the last screw from the main cover, you want to slide the cover forward and then actually just lift it off to the right side, and that's how you remove the cover. Prior to removing this front plate, it's recommended to put a mark with a magic marker in a slot in the rotor receiver to prevent misalignment, so you have that red line facing upwards when you reinstall the front plate. Prior to removing the front plate, carefully remove this electrical connector, just kind of wiggle it, pull it out from the touch screen. And then we're going to use a 5 millimeter Allen wrench and a 4 millimeter Allen wrench. You probably have a set like this. Use the ball driver portion of the Allen, I'll show you. So there's 2 5 millimeter Allen wrench screws that have come in from the front. So as you can see, I'm coming on a little bit of an angle to remove this screw. And then there's also another one right here. Okay, so once you have the 2 5 millimeter Allen screws removed, and what I'm going to do is lift the unit, and there's 2 4 millimeter Allen screws that come in to the bottom of the front plate. And now I have all the screws removed. Before removing the front plate assembly, hold the rotary receiver and the rotary receiver cover towards the back plate here. So what I'm going to do is just kind of hold this in position and wiggle and pull this forward, and just be conscientious of the hoses and wires that are in the front of the plate. Prior to lubricating the piston, tip the front plate assembly up like so. If you do have any hoses or wires, especially if you notice the wires are tight, possibly remove them from the board, the connector from the board, and plug them in. Since this model of the PDM4.0 has a 3/8 inch air line here, it also has the piston with the O-rings, and we're going to do that preventative maintenance at 500,000 cycles. Now I'll be removing the 4mm Allen screws from the plate that holds the cylinder onto the connector block. Now we're going to be removing the piston by grabbing the cylinder and just pulling back and removing the piston out of the connector block. And as you notice, on the front side of the piston there's a rectangular hole and a round hole, and on the back side just a rectangular hole. So when you reassemble, you need to make sure that the rectangular hole and round hole are facing towards the front of the unit. We'll go in this way. Now what I'm going to do is just grab a rag and clean the piston, get all the old lubrication off there. Prior to lubricating the piston, you'll notice this piston has the O-rings on it, which do not need to be replaced. What you want to do is put a light film of grease on the piston, and you want to try to avoid putting any grease in the holes here, because the piston shifts back and forth and it could blow grease out, and there's an exit sensor in the front of the connector block. So again, light film of grease like you've seen me put on here. And then what I'm going to do is just reinsert my piston in the connector block, and again, make sure that my round hole is facing towards the front of the dispenser, like so. Slide it back in. Okay. And when you get to the O-rings, you just want to make sure you don't roll any O-ring. Just kind of wiggle them till you get the O-rings seated in there properly. And now you can see my cylinder with the front plate here all the way up against the connector block. Next, I'll be performing the recommended preventative maintenance on the piston of the dispenser with the 1/4 inch air line that needs to be done every 1 million cycles. Then I'll be putting the unit back together. Now I'll be removing the 4mm Allen screws from the plate that holds the cylinder onto the connector block. Now, grab the cylinder with the piston attached and just pull backwards on it, and you'll notice you pull the piston assembly out of the connector block. As you notice, the front of the piston has got a rectangular hole and a round hole, and when you put it back together, the round hole has to be facing towards the front of the unit. The back of the piston only has the rectangular hole. So what I'm going to do is grab a rag and just clean the old grease off of here. And then what I'm going to do is grab the proper grease. Now we're putting a light film of grease on the piston. So try not to get anywhere the holes are at, because that blows air towards the front of the unit, and there's a exit sensor in the front. So again, I got a light film of grease on the piston, and now what I'm going to do is take and slide it back in the connector block, and again, my round hole is facing towards the front of the unit. slide it back in. Okay. Now reinstalled the four 4mm screws that holds the cylinder and plate to the connector block. Now make sure all four of your 4mm Allen screws are tight. And next we'll be reinstalling the front plate. A couple things to pay attention to when reinstalling the front plate is the pin needs to go in the hole in the rotary receiver, and also the rotary receiver cover is going to fit into a slot in the front plate. And also the hoses and wires on the bottom, make sure they're all tucked in the frame of the dispenser. Okay. Now I'm going to be reinstalling the front plate. I slid the pin inside the hole in the rotary receiver. Again, lifting my hoses up here. And now I'm lining up my rotary receiver cover into the front plate. And as you notice, I have everything kind of tucked inside the frame of the dispenser nicely. Now I'm going to put the two 5mm Allen screws in, and since this one I have to come at an angle, a lot of times I'll start it by hand to make sure, because if you come at an angle you could possibly cross thread it. So again, I got that 5mm screw started, and then what I'm going to do is grab the other one and I can have it come in just right through here, and then I can start it real easy. So I have the two 5mm screws started, and I don't tighten them up all the way. Then I'm going to tip the unit up and grab my two 4mm screws, and I'm going to just finger start them here. And grab my 4mm Allen wrench and completely tighten these up. Now I can set this back down and grab my 5mm Allen wrench and finish tightening up these two screws here. Now, prior to putting your main cover on, take and plug in your electrical connector, like so, and then grab your main cover. And what you want to do again is to kind of come in from the right side. And what I'm trying to do is my couple of air lines over here, make sure I dress them inside the dispenser, inside the frame of the dispenser. So I'm coming in from the right side. I'm making sure my cover is underneath this black piece right here. And so I got it like so. And then just pull, I'm going to pull the cover on the left side over so it fits down. And then just kind of wiggle the cover forward. And now it's seated properly. And now I'm going to install the 8 2.5mm screws. The location of your 8 2.5mm Allen screws are 1 here, 3 on this side, 2 in the front, and 2 on this side. And I've started the screws, so I'm just going to finish tightening them. Next, I'll be reinstalling the front plate. This sets on like so. And then we're going to take and install our 4 2.5mm Allen screws. By the way, the main reason for removing this front plate is so you don't accidentally damage the touchscreen when you go to put the cover back on if this touchscreen was in place. And the last thing we're going to do is take and put our side cover on, slide it in like so, and then tighten up my 2 thumb screws. This concludes our PDM 4.0 recommended preventative maintenance.